Hello, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who have been here a while, for those of you who have just joined or have literally just stumbled upon me through this video today, big welcome to you also. I've had such a great joy in the last few weeks seeing so many new folks come and subscribe to the channel. I genuinely just do this out of a love of Formula 1, so to see other people enjoying the videos is just fantastic. So thank you all for joining me firstly. I'm very much looking forward to getting into this topic for today's video because essentially in Formula 1 right now, if you're not having a discussion about whether or not Lewis Hamilton is going to retire, you're probably talking about today's topic, which is what the 2022 regulation changes are going to mean for the teams, what kind of impact they're going to have on the racing that we're going to see. So I know that these regulations are obviously very, very technical. The sport in general is very, very technical. We know this. So what I've done is I've essentially broken down the regulations into the three that I'm most interested in seeing the impact of. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a quick explainer for each of them, very much in plain English, so that we know exactly what we're dealing with. And then I'm going to give you my opinion and my predictions on who I think is going to come out on top thanks to these new regulations. Before I get into the video, do remember to hit that big red subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. And also, if you learned something new in this video, if you have a particular opinion on anything, I absolutely love hanging out with you all in the comments and replying. So please do leave a comment as well after you've watched. And you know, why not give it a thumbs up? The trifecta. Go for it. Alright, let's get into this first regulation change. So essentially, the air is going to be less turbulent that comes off the back of the cars. That's what we're really going to be chatting about here with this first regulation change. And if you go back to my video that I did on the 5 beginner steps to Formula 1, you'll have seen that I chatted about something called dirty air. When you see cars driving closely together, often you'll see over a period of time performance of the car behind will start to drop. They'll see higher tire degradation. A lot of problems come from this. Formula 1 cars are not comfortable in their previous formats with following each other really closely, and that's tricky for a couple of reasons, but primarily in terms of overtaking, it makes overtaking really hard. So the DRS zone is, you have to be within a second of the car in front of you, but if you're struggling on performance to catch up to the car in front of you to get into that 1 second window, it means it's going to take you longer to overtake. And let's say it's the final stages of a race, you could just be stuck in that middle ground where you've made up all the space up until that middle ground, and then you just can't quite get into that 1 second or under the 1 second window to the car in front of you in order to take advantage of DRS and hopefully get that overtake. So it is a problem, and essentially Formula 1 have recognised this, and the new regulations are claiming that it's going to make it more than 30% more easy for a car to follow another car. Now, 30% jump is very big, I would say. In such a technical sport where things often are really close together, especially in the kind of different tiers. So obviously you've got the folks at the top of the grid, the sort of middle of the pack, and then the folks nearer the back. Things generally are quite close between those teams. So if you're talking 30%, we should absolutely be seeing more overtakes this season based on that. And I'm going to be really curious to see whether that kind of prediction is actually going to ring true, or whether it's going to turn out to be a little bit less emphatic than that. Okay, second big thing is that tyres are going to look a lot bigger by 5 inches. In fact, they're going from 13 to 18 inches, which is going to look very different on screen. I'm curious to see how that's going to look, but they're also going to degrade differently. So tire deg is another term that I talked about in my beginner's guide to F1 video, and essentially it's just the degradation of the tire over time. We have the different compounds of tire. A lot of things go into how quickly it's going to degrade track temperature, air temperature, how closely you're following behind the other car, again, as I talked about in the last point. And essentially what's happening with these new regulation changes is the goal will be that the tyres degrade more consistently and over a longer period of time. What this could mean in terms of the tyres degrading more consistently and over a longer period of time is it could potentially neutralise the advantage that drivers like Sergio Perez have in terms of being really well known for taking great care of their tyres. There's a couple of drivers like that out there, but Checo is the one that kind of jumps into my mind right now. And the good thing about that is that it potentially puts all the drivers on a more level playing field, and also it could mean that it introduces more kind of competition around strategy and pit stop. So there's been a lot of chat around this tyre topic and specifically the changes that it's going to bring in, and because of the difference in the degradation, a lot of people are predicting that many more races will now become one-stops. And while I don't fundamentally have a problem with one-stop races, as we all know, some circuits, particularly the ones that don't allow for very much overtaking, can be really boring to watch, especially if there's big gaps in between the field and there's just kind of nothing going on. Unfortunately, every so often in Formula 1, like, those races do come up, and sometimes the pit stops are actually the only thing that introduces a bit of excitement into those types of races. So I would be slightly concerned that if almost everything goes to one stop, like, are we going to get less excitement around pit stops? Or, you know, if the cars are going to be following each other more closely, sure, there's going to be more wheel-to-wheel action, but then that means that the drivers aren't going to be able to build up, you know, those large gaps that we kind of have seen historically, where they can fit in a pit stop and like not fall all the way back down to the end of the classification. I'm curious to see like how this is actually going to play out and whether the difference is going to be that large with all of these kind of regulations combined, that pit stops are going to become something where the strategists on the teams are going to have to sort of like fundamentally change their philosophy around it and how they build out, or maybe they can no longer build out in some cases, the gaps to bring their drivers in so that they don't massively compromise them for the rest of the race. So this third regulation is an interesting one, and essentially what they brought in is that there's going to be 5 different types of car part, and they all have sort of different labels, but essentially they're going to range from the existing type, which are known as listed parts, where the team designs them, builds them, they own the intellectual property rights for them, and they're going to range from that to open source parts, which, if you're familiar with developing or anything like that, essentially means that when you design something, it's open for anyone else to use. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to be used, or really if it's going to get much use at all, because it is still different from transferable parts, which are another category. Those are parts that can be kind of, they're happy for like teams to swap them in between them, which already happens a lot, especially if you know, you have scenarios like Red Bull and AlphaTauri, for example. But given the secrecy and often, let's be honest, the drama around parts and designs in between teams, like we literally only have to look at last season with Mercedes and Red Bull to get a recent example, I really don't know how willing teams are going to be to like share their toys on this one, especially when the incentive around it isn't particularly clear. So it may be that this just sort of like falls into the background and is never spoken about again and is not used, but there must be a reason behind creating it. So I'm curious to see how it plays out and if it ends up having any significant part in the design of the cars. The question obviously that we're all dying to know the answer to when the season comes back is who is going to benefit most from these changes. I will caveat my predictions that are coming in a second and just say that obviously there are a lot of factors that go into the success or lack of success for any team in a Formula 1 season. So my predictions that are coming up here are purely based on the predicted or projected differences that the regulation changes are going to make. So you know, realistically, the middle of the pack are always going to be the people who are the happiest about closing any type of gap. So I still think there will be sort of, you know, categories or like bunches of teams together, but I do hope that at least some of the stuff that I'm about to chat about comes true, because I think it would make the season very interesting indeed. Alright, so my first team that I'm predicting are going to be very happy about the impact of these regulation changes is McLaren. So McLaren are already very strong last season. They've got Lando Norris, who is practically an OG in the team, I suppose, in comparison to Daniel Ricciardo, and really performed really impressively last year and is clearly capable of chopping it up amongst the cream of the crop, right up there with Lewis and Max. And even though Daniel had his very well documented struggles in the car last year, I think he'll be quietly confident. You know, he still managed to get McLaren their first win since 2012 in that car, despite the struggles that he was having. So I think between them, they'll be sort of on a potentially more level playing field. And I think Daniel, controversial here, but I do think he does have that slight edge. I think the experience that he has really showed out in getting that win. And we saw Lando sort of fall apart when his opportunity to get his first win came, and I think a lot of that was down to inexperience. So Daniel does have that, and he also has like just obviously that honey badger aggression when it comes to wheel combat, I guess, and overtaking. And I think if we're talking about a lot of wheel-to-wheel action over the course of this season, I think Daniel might just pip Lando on this one. So the next team that I want to talk about is Alpine. I would say that Alpine punched above their weight last season. I think they really took their opportunities when they presented themselves. Obviously Esteban getting his first win in the race in Hungary. And actually they only missed out on 2 point scoring opportunities across the entire season, and they had reliability issues during that time. So I think they really did kind of outperform what folks would have expected from them. And they also have a very kind of strong driver pairing in terms of having a mature driver and a younger driver. Don't get me wrong, this kind of combo does not always work. Alonso himself had a terrible relationship with Lewis Hamilton when Hamilton was a rookie, with Alonso being the older driver at McLaren. But it feels like with Esteban, Fernando sort of seems to have a partner that he can like mold and teach, and they also seem to have a very solid foundation of doing what's best for each other in scenarios where one person clearly has an opportunity. The other driver is very much willing to get behind them, even if it means making some sort of sacrifice for their own race. And I think that actually could be key here, especially that now that they are, you know, one of these sort of, they really have like a spark in that middle of the pack, I think. And I think if they can keep a cool head and work together effectively, then I think they could kind of swoop in and take the spoils when you compare them to other pairings that they might be close to, like the Ferraris, for example. I think where Leclerc and Sainz are more likely to end up like scrapping or complaining about each other on track, Fernando and Esteban could be just lurking in the background, ready to take their opportunity. I think if Alpine can build a car that is reliable enough that it will enable those two drivers to take their opportunities when they present themselves, I think Alpine could really be up there this season. Okay, number 3, Ferrari. Ferrari have not had a solid package lately, let's be honest. And essentially what this has meant, especially last season, is that what is really a superstar driver pairing of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz have underperformed against their actual talent and abilities. And with the new regulation changes and the new car development, I'm kind of very much hoping that the drivers will actually now be able to show us what they're capable of. And, you know, I understand the draw of being a Ferrari driver, or, you know, wanting to have that on your career resume as a Formula 1 driver that you drove for Ferrari. But let's be honest, it doesn't work for everyone. I mean, literally Sebastian Vettel. And I think Leclerc and Sainz, they're two of the most talented young drivers on the grid, and if they get a chance to prove it, I think they could really push on and get some impressive results. The one downside potentially of giving them both more ability to perform, and we're talking about like all this wheel-to-wheel action that we mentioned a couple of times because of the regulations, I think it could potentially lead to fireworks between these two. We have had a couple of scenarios in the 2021 season already where they didn't play as nicely together as Ferrari would have liked, and it's led to some not so friendly radio messages.
Come on, Charles, don't do this. I passed him. Tell him to give me the position immediately. Immediately, guys. He's gonna get a penalty, you know?
These two young hotheads could potentially require a lot of management by their team if things do get fiery on track. They're highly capable, and if they're going to be in there in the thick of the action, sparks could fly. Alright everyone, that's all I've got for you on this topic, but I would love to know what you all think. Do you completely disagree with my team predictions for who's going to come out on top of these regulations? Do you think that still no one will be able to touch Mercedes and Red Bull in a meaningful way? Drop a comment down below. I would really be interested to hear what your thoughts are. I'll be hanging out with you all in the comments, and until then, take care.